So welcome to this workshop. It is called Wisdom, Understanding, and Knowledge, a Native Chabad Jewish Orthodox Practice of Meditation. So this is offered by Shiva Center. If you are new to us, we are a Jewish nonprofit recovery home and community that supports addicts of all kinds and people from all walks of life. We integrate Jewish wisdom, addiction recovery, resources, spirituality, and community into different programs that are drop-in groups, etc. So before we begin, I will just introduce our two hosts this evening for this event, and then I'll go over some really quick housekeeping stuff. First, I'll introduce you to Rabbi Iggy, who's one of the founders of Shiva Center. He's a renowned Talmud teacher, spiritual counselor, artist, and educator. He grew up between Belgium and Israel, so expect him to be well-dressed and blunt, as well as in the United States in a traditional Jewish Orthodox home. He's an author, speaker, teacher, and contributor on subjects ranging from Talmud, Jewish texts, spirituality, addiction, recovery, fatherhood, and LGBTQI+ issues. And today he's founding rabbi and CEO of Shiva Center, and was formerly the director of spiritual counseling at Beit Shuva in Los Angeles. And tonight we are blessed to be with Rabbi Chanan Drew Rose. This evening, he is a rabbi from San Francisco, California, and he raised reform. Chanan began exploring traditional Judaism in high school, and after graduating, he traveled around the world to study in different Jewish institutions. Ordained in Pretoria, South Africa in 2012. He specializes in Jewish mysticism and philosophy with ongoing research in Jewish methodology of meditation, prayer, transformation, and spiritual practice. He has a passion for playing the blues and studying ancient Jewish mystics, and he lives with his wife in Brooklyn, New York. Before I hand it over to them, I'll just share, we do have some agreements that we have in this space. If you are going to share, please feel free to share, ask questions, share insights, feedback in the chat, and please do so in a kind and respectful way. And we do invite you to participate throughout this evening. So please feel free to hop into the chat with any questions for our two rabbis, and or just to share your experience this evening. And then Rabbi Iggy and Rabbi Chanan Drew Rose will field as many questions and reports throughout the workshop as time permits. With that, I will hand it over to you two for this beautiful evening of meditation.
Cool. Thank you, Jess. Hello, everyone. Like just said, sort of like, both Rabbi Rose and I love interaction. So if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat. We will read it and we'll answer as many as possible. Also your experiences and everything else. So at the end, we'll probably have some time for some more Q&A. And then if people actually want to go on mic and talk, then we can do that as well. So with that said, this is, I'll say, but this is a great privilege. This is a great honor for all sorts of different reasons to do this workshop, primarily because I've known Rabbi Rose for a very, very, very long time, and although I have very little to do with his brilliance, I could not be more proud to do this with you and sort of to see the man you've become. I mean, this is one of.
I think you have more than a little to do.
But also, and I think this we'll talk about sort of like how you got in your story, but how so few of us in general have any access into the inner world of spirituality within the Orthodox world, into the Orthodox world in general, right? So the Orthodox world for a lot of people is this monolith, right? For many, right, it looks, right, they're wearing black coats or black hats or black strimals or whatever. And most people within the non-Orthodox world don't get to talk to anybody, don't get to really ask questions, don't get to have really any deep and meaningful questions, and vice versa. So I think it is a great gift and really an opportunity for great insight to really talk to somebody who is in many ways, in terms of its theology and its sort of practice, is far away from me, right, as possible, right? So like, I think we'll discover we have a lot of sort of soul in common, but in terms of the day-to-day practice and the communities we lived in, had we not known each other, this is probably would never be able to happen. So I both thank you and excited for that.
Yeah, I'm excited too.
So tell us, so let's start, right, sort of, you grew up in San Francisco, you did not grow up in Chabad, right? Sort of
did, right. So I did not grow up really any type of observant. I grew up, we went to Congregation Emmanuel, which is a Reformed synagogue in San Francisco. My father was always very passionate about Judaism, but it was certainly within the confines of Reformed Judaism. And I never really knew much outside of that. And by, what at the time I thought was a fluke, now I would call divine providence, I ended up in a Jewish high school in San Francisco that is tremendously unique. I'm not sure anything exists like it anywhere else in the world. And it brings together Jewish kids of all backgrounds and is sensitive to Jewish, sort of traditional Jewish practice, and is progressive at the same time, and sort of, at least when I was there, tries to marry the two. So my sophomore year, Rabbi Iggy was my Talmud teacher, and me and a dear friend became obsessed with Mashiach, the Jewish understanding of Messiah, and everything that goes on in that. Iggy was not happy about that.
Although I think we did study that, right? I think that we studied this idea of Messianism in Talmud, whatever, and I think that sort of sparked the interest. Yeah. Little did I know.
Yeah. Right. So, but I vividly remember with my friend begging you for a while that we should look at that topic.
Right.
And so at the end of the year, the final that was assigned was an art project. And my friend and I made a documentary on Mashiach. And we came up with 5-6 basic questions of who is the Messiah? What is the revival of the dead all about? What does a perfect society look like? And we went to everybody we could talk to. We went to Jews for Jesus. We went to a Reform rabbi, a conservative rabbi. We went to a priest. And the last place we went was Khabad. And it was actually right before it was Erev Shavuot. Everybody was getting ready for the holiday, and it was madness. And we showed up, and they were like, "Oh, you should stay," obviously. And we stayed. We were there the whole night because Shavuot, which celebrates the giving of the Torah, the custom is to stay up till dawn. So we were 16, 17, like we could pull an all-nighter, no problem. So we were jazzed. And then, pretty much went back every Friday night after that. And because I was in the school that was, sort of geared towards, at least made exploration of different pathways in Judaism possible, it was really easy for me to dive into learning Talmud and learning Jewish thought and theology. And I put together some really substantial skills and went to Israel the next year to a yeshiva with a bunch of kids who grew up religious. And, I could learn Talmud with them. I could hold my own with all of them. So you do have something to do with it.
Indeed. So in that, right, and right in the sort of canon of Khabad, of course, what is it about this sort of notion of both Mashiach and this idea that really intrigued you, or this still intrigues you, right? So like in this, because it is on I won't say on the extreme, but it is a little bit like further right? So then a lot of Orthodox people are like, okay, we Orthodox, whatever, but this putting at the center of this idea of this mythical figure is quintessential to Chabad in a very interesting way. So what is it personally that sort of that? I guess my first question is, how does it affect you on a day-to-day basis, right? How does it translate to your own theology?
So I think what spoke to me, I'm not sure I was able to articulate it so well at the time. I think it was just something novel and new and exciting. that had a vitality and an energy around it that seemed that I wanted to know more about. As I learned more about it, and what continues to infuse my Judaism today, is that the focus of Mashiach and bringing about a messianic era in Judaism is not about the person, whoever Mashiach is, and it's not about some far off like fantasy world where candy's growing on trees. But the real primary focus is that what we do matters, and that every mitzvah and every good deed and every favor we do for another Jew can transform all of reality. And it's based on an idea that the physical world is not a purely physical place, and that everything that exists is an expression of godliness. And in that, when we interact with each other, and being that we have souls, and when we interact with things, being that they have godliness imbued within them, we're interacting really with that godliness. And the goal of Judaism is to reveal that, is to make the godliness the primary emphasis and the primary focus, and that the physicality of it should be aligned with that, instead of existing in its own for its own sake. And so that idea is what ultimately brings about a messianic era, is that because it says the Maimonides brings his last chapters of the Mishneh Torah, of his magnum opus 14-volume set, is the laws regarding the messianic era. And he says that the pasuk, the verse that really informs the whole idea, is Umala Aretz Deas Es Hashem, that the world will be filled with knowledge of God. And knowledge, we know, in for those of us who are biblically inclined, the first use of the word knowledge, of das as knowledge, is Va'adam Yada Es Chava, which means that Adam knew Eve, but the connotation there is a sexual connotation. It's a relationship, right? So the world being filled with the knowledge of God is that everything that we interact with will be a godly experience. That's the messianic era.
So that state, right? So is it always a utopic state, or right? So right, what is our responsibility to bring that state on, right? So right, what I'm hearing, if I'm hearing right, is that the cure, was it like the cure is the maintenance, or in that sense of regret, right? So like that, by doing all the things we're doing, by being more messianic now, we will bring a messianic era, right? So on a day-to-day basis, how does that look for somebody?
So there's a, obviously it's something that has to be internalized. It's a consciousness that one has to develop, because a person can go through his day, right? Even a person who's involved in keeping mitzvot, however that looks, you can do it in a rote fashion, or even in a meaningful fashion, but it could still be all related to, elevating my experience or refining my consciousness in my own personal limited experience. And then there's a different consciousness, which is that what I do affects the world around me, right? Maimonides also teaches that a person should constantly see himself and the world around him as a scale, and that one positive deed, be it a mitzvah or a favor for a Jew or a good deed, can tip that scale and can change that reality. And really, the reality isn't changing. It's interesting, there's, like everything in Judaism, it's a disagreement about what the order is and what the world will look like in a messianic era, so to speak. But the main focus is that we don't strive to be in heaven and to be spiritual entities. Judaism's focus is for us to be in physical bodies. We value the physical because the physical is while it hides, in a way, it covers over the godliness to the most extreme, it also is laden with the most potential. And that when physicality is aligned, then it shines forth in a way that can transcend any type of spiritual experience. So the goal is to be in this world. It's not that when Mashiach comes, anything's going to look any different. We're going to be physical people in physical bodies. But the difference is that right now we identify primarily as bodies. And if we're lucky, we have moments where we feel ourselves as a soul. And when Mashiach comes, the idea is that we're going to identify as souls, but we're still going to be in a physical experience.
Fascinating, right. Eckhart Tolle, right, so asked, right, are we a physical creature having a spiritual moment, or are we a spiritual being having a physical moment, right? So, in a very similar fashion, right, so what you're describing, and I think that one of the key elements of recovery for me, right, because that's where we come from to that, right, is that the practice of, or at least the discipline of spirituality is aiming to do just that, is aiming to sort of to see how can I have more percentage of spirituality with a already very physical existence, right? The person who is impoverished, right, spiritually is in that sense closer to an addict, because then you are, let's say, right, 98% body, 2% spirit, right? And I'm not striving to be 100% spirit at all, but I am striving to sort of to have, I don't know, like, 52% body and like, and the rest spiritual.
And Chuck C talks about in A New Pair of Glasses, the diagram that he puts, which is my absolute favorite, right? So he has a little stick figure and it says me and like ego, and then there's a circle, and that's all of existence. And he says his whole thing is that God is good and is life, right?
Right.
So they're all synonymous, and it's all of existence within that circle. And I feel my experience as a physical being, right? The addict experience is that the entire universe stops right here. Right. It stops in my nose, and there's all y'all and just me.
Right.
Right. And so, be it either the program or Judaism, the idea is to insert yourself back into that circle.
Right. So there are two questions. We'll get to them, right? But just to put them on the brain docket, right? One is, how is Chabad meditation different than Buddhist meditation? We'll definitely get to that. And then a different question is, when we die, what happens to our soul? So I guess we can sort of touch a little bit on that one, and then continue with that. So what does happen to us when we die in the way the sort of the world articulated, at least through Khabad?
So, thank God I haven't experienced it. So I'm going off what other people tell me, what the books say.
Fair enough.
The idea of the soul is, when we talk about a soul, the mystics always tell us that a soul is a piece of God, right? What connects us to one another, what makes us feel like we know each other, even if we've never met, is because there's something inherent inside of us that is way beyond our physical being. Right. And it's this godliness and God, we know Judaism's whole focus. There's only one thing that nobody disagrees about in Judaism, and that is that there's one God. Right. Everything else is up for debate. But the God being one is that's the only thing we all agree on. Yes. So oneness is that if there's one, it's not a cardinal one where one and then two and then three and then four, but it's one is a unity, is a solo, right? It's just one. So a soul is a, so to speak, a piece of that oneness that we experience, that is put in that is put in a body, and that creates the person, right? When we look at a corpse, right, there's technically nothing different between a corpse and a person who's alive, but there's a vitality that's missing. So we would say that vitality is a soul. And that's the most basic level of the soul. And the mystics talk about different levels of the soul till what's called the yichida, the unified point of the soul, which is the essence of the soul, which is pure godliness. So the soul exists forever. It says that when a person dies, the soul, so to speak, goes above, meaning it transcends to a spiritual realm, because there's everything in the mystical tradition is all about energy and its containers. So the soul is the energy that's contained within the body. So without a container, a soul exists only in a spiritual realm, on a spiritual plane. So that's what it talks about when we say, if we use an expression like it goes to heaven, or it goes above, or it goes to the Garden of Eden, or different things that are discussed. It means that it exists in a spiritual plane, and it exists in a way that is unlimited, right? It's unified with its source, and its existence is about experiencing the godliness that it was involved with and interacting with while it was on earth. So everything that we do when we do a mitzvah and we're engaging with godliness, so that is, so to speak, almost you could think of it as like stored up or saved or something like that. And then the soul engages with it in a different paradigm than how we experience it in this physical world. It engages with it in a more spiritual paradigm.
So there's a quote like Michael asked that somebody said to him, a mentor said to him, if God is the spirit soul of the universe, the spirit in us is literally a bit of the divine. When our spirit leaves our body, it fully rejoins, merges into the spirit. He asked, how does Khabad feel about this statement? So I don't know if Drew can talk about Khabad, but like for Khabad,
right,
like,
right. Yeah. I'm definitely not, don't consider me an authority, but I would agree with everything but the first statement, only insofar as that God is the spirit of existence is true, but it's ultimately limiting God, right? When we talk about God, this is sort of gets into that's almost like a Spinoza type of area, but we talk about Judaism as being monotheistic, right? And that doesn't really capture the entire idea, because really it's about I think the mystics would say that it's a monotheistic panentheism, right? Pantheism is that God is existence, and panentheism means that there's a transcendent aspect to God as well, right? Existence can't contain God, but existence is dependent upon God, and within that, it's all one. So there's different modes in which we experience or that's expressed, but ultimately it still contains a unity. Everything else I think I would agree with, though.
Right. I like that. So is one of the quotes like, so is our body the vessel of the soul?
Yes.
Yeah. It's funny that, right, there's a great piece of Talmud that says that in the question of where does sin lie, right? That at the time of death, the soul leaves the body and says, now that I've left the body, I can't sin anymore. Clearly, it means that sort of the body, is where the sin is. And the body is basically saying, like, to the soul, WTF, no, as soon as you left the body, like, I can't move. So clearly you are the origin of the sin, right? And
yeah,
and right, and then there's a whole sort of parable about a garden, a fig orchard, right? And sort of, but basically it was like, how does God do it? And in that sense, it's sort of God judges them both together. That God judges eventually, right, the body and the soul together, which I've always liked, because I think like as you're describing, that the physical body is not something to be ignored as a hindrance to our spirituality, but rather that, right, we have to use it in order to attain higher levels of spirituality.
Yeah, I would say even a step further, the ultimate focus of a Jew's experience in this world is to align his body and his what the mystics would call the animal soul, which is sort of the vitality of that body, is to align that it should also be interested in serving God. Right? Naturally, the body wants to do whatever the body wants to do, whatever easiest for the body, whether it's sleeping or eating or right. And similarly, when we think about it in an animalistic sense, it has all the similar connotations. And it's no great chiddush. It's not novel for the soul to want to serve God, right? The soul is godly. It wants to connect to God by nature, right? The power is that when we learn enough about ourselves, that our makeup is dynamic and sophisticated and multifaceted, that we have a godly aspect to us, and we're able to transcend our physical limitations by aligning and associating with our soul, then the body wants to get involved with it.
So I love that, right? So like we have to train our body to be wanting to serve God, and we have to train our soul to wanting to be part of the body, right? That, you know, in that sense, I think one of the reasons why Judaism is very anti-monastic anything, right? We don't like monks. We don't like monastic life. We don't like these Nazarite laws, right? We're like the ultimate for us is not to live somewhere out of community by ourselves, depriving our body from anything, on a mystical river. We're like, no, right? We want you to practice. We want you to practice Torah in that sense, right? Practice spirituality every single time, right? Every moment you put in your shoes,
and we're not
sex,
right. Exactly, your shoes is a great example, right? That every moment is pregnant with an opportunity to connect to something beyond you. So that people think that there's rules, right? There's laws about how to put on your shoes, and people think that's preposterous.
Right.
But if you look at it like there's a body, there's a corpus in place that's trying to keep you down and trying to keep you obedient and in line, then yeah, it's absolutely preposterous. But if you think about it, that it doesn't really make a difference to God how you put on your shoes at the end of the day. But there is a way that based on what other things we know about Judaism, that it could be informed in how you put on your shoes, and that's a moment that you can experience something beyond you. Right. And I would say further on the monastic idea, we're not even into asceticism, right? The Mizritcher Maggid, who was the disciple of the Baal Shem Tov, the Baal Shem Tov founded the Hasidic movement. So his primary student was the Mizritcher Maggid, and he had a famous line that said that a small hole in the body makes a tremendous hole in the soul.
Ooh, wait, say it again. A small hole in the body makes a tremendous hole in the soul.
So we think that there were schools of thought at the time that said that you have to neglect the body and you have to fast, and people would do crazy stuff. They would go out there were stories of guys who used to lie in the field and let the ants bite them, or people who would roll around naked in the snow. Like they would do crazy stuff to like disconnect themselves from their body. And the Hasidic movement came along and was like, this is not the deal at all. Right? The body is the ultimate tool.
The body is the ultimate, right? So, right, the pain, the asceticism, right, is not part of our tradition. I mean, there's a few examples of it still, right? Nachumish Gamzum Talmud, right? So there's a few examples of people who are using pain as a way, but they are far and few, and they are rejected in many ways.
Right.
And I like it because you talk about the message in the whole, and I'm thinking about Asher Yata, right? The blessing we say. In the bathroom, right? Which was in the Jewish tradition, the blessing that basically says, thank God everything's working all right, because if things close up or open up, I wouldn't be able to live, right? So everything, thank God everything closes, opens in the bathroom the way it should, right?
Right. And it's wondrous, right? We end off that blessing by saying it's wondrous.
Right, because it's true that if something doesn't open properly, we can't focus on anything else.
Yep. I had a friend who was a real old timer in the program, and he used to always say, as long as you can see, pee, and walk.
Yes. It's true. It's true. It's true. Can we have something like, can we have a relationship with God without feeling soulful? I think I would say yes. I don't know how Rabbi Rose did. Like, I would say yes, because you already have a relationship with God. The only question is how much attention you're putting into it. The fact that you have a soul already means that you have a relationship with the divine, right? Whatever that means to you, right? The question now is how much, what kind of relationship do you want it to be? Do you want to be a codependent relationship? Do you want to be a dependent relationship? Do you want to be a good relationship? Do you want to be a bad relationship? An abusive relationship, right? So like now you get to decide what kind of relationship you have.
Right. I would also, think that the idea of feeling soulful can be misleading, in that we have a tendency to think that Judaism, and certainly more traditional practices of Judaism, are very closed in and not spiritual. And we think of spiritual as being traditions outside Judaism, right? When we think of meditation, we think of Buddhism, right? We don't think of Judaism. And Judaism doesn't have a connotation of being soulful or spiritual. And to realign that, to think about the first thing would be just to meditate on one's vitality. Just thinking about that the blood running through your veins, right? The Torah teaches us that it says the blood is the soul, right? It's the most baseline vitality is a soul experience already. And from there you can extrapolate and you can go deeper into from vitality into emotions and into intellect and into a more essential part of self, right? Will is sort of the bridge in between the two of those, right? Because everything that we talk about, be it the blood or the emotions or the intellect, we can all point to a spot in our body where we experience that, right? The intellect is in my mind, the desires, my emotions my emotions exist as a heart thing, right? But will doesn't have a space, right? It sort of transcends all of that. And that's really the bridge where you start to jump to a more essential self.
Right. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about sort of Jewish meditation, which is sort of like right at the core of what we're trying to do, right? So you're right in that a lot of people sort of like when they think of meditation, they think that it is A, external to Judaism, B, that it is practiced by liberals, right? So like, and that, right? So like, I'll be a little, I hope nobody comes at me, but like, right? It's sort of like, right? Jewish mysticism is like creating pseudo alphabet positions in yoga. Right? So like, right? This is an aleph, this is a taf, right? So they think what it is some kind, right? For a lot of people, it is some kind of weird marriage between things we've learned in the East and then our tradition. But what you bring to the table, right? Or not just you, but you're representing, right? That it's not, right? It's not external to us. It's not an import.
Correct. So you said before, about getting the body interested in experiencing godliness and getting the soul invested in being a part, right? So you have in the Torah tells us that we say in the Shema that you have to, there is an idea to serve God, right? And it uses a term of eved, which is connected with an idea of a servant or a slave, right? But the Talmud asks, what does it mean to serve God? And that is prayer, right? What is avoda? Is tefillah. And avoda, while its connotations typically are around slavery or servitude, I think is the word.
Yeah.
There's a different etymological source, which is tanning hides. Ibud orot is to work hides and to tan them.
Right. To work something. Yeah.
Right. So that's the idea of prayer, is to work on the physicality and to refine it and to elevate it and really to align it with identifying as spiritual. By the same time, we know the Tanakh, the Bible teaches us that Ner Hashem Nishmat Adam, right? That the soul is a candle. And the candle, the idea of a candle is that it's constantly trying, when you watch a candle jumping constantly, it's always trying to leave the wick.
Right. God's
so the soul
of man.
Right. So our soul has this candle experience where it's constantly trying to leave the wick and evaporate into the ether, and the soul, the wick, which represents the body, is what's keeping it down. So prayer is the experience of,
and by doing so, by the way, by doing so, producing enormous amounts of light.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Just like, yeah. So yeah, go on. Sorry.
Yeah. So prayer is where you bridge those two, right? So prayer has an attribute of, or an aspect of, refining physicality, and also sort of feeling my soul constantly long for something bigger than me, and then reinvesting it back into my physical day-to-day experience. So when we talk about Khabad, people think of Khabad as, if they had any experience with Khabad, it's usually that there are such things as Khabad houses, and that there are guys in Manhattan in hats and jackets that are trying to put tefillin on with you.
Yep.
Right. Those are the things people know about Chabad.
Or try to make me go into a sukkah, right?
Right. Totally.
Which is funny, which is always on the little truck.
Yeah.
Which makes the sukkah not kosher. But like I don't want to say, but it's like it's not quite. It's not on the ground.
There's a story about the Baal Shem Tov that he would make the sukkah using every possible leniency, because he knew that he was then legitimizing other people's sukkahs who couldn't afford to make such a good one.
All of a sudden, leniency is a big value. Whoa.
Yeah, listen, we got
to.
If you're helping Jews, otherwise the ethos at the time was that if you're not super learned and you're not, the Talmud Chacham, you're not the wise guy, then your service is worthless. And the Baal Shem Tov's whole deal, Chassidus, the Hasidic movement came about to say that everybody's relationship with God is valuable, and God values all of it.
Oh, I definitely believe that too, for sure.
Yeah.
So go on to meditation. Yeah.
Okay, so Chabad. So Chabad is actually an acronym, like we said in the title, that it stands for Chachma, which is wisdom, Bina, which is understanding, and Das, which is knowledge. And we already touched on Das as an idea of knowledge is not just knowing something outside of you, but it's about connecting to it. Bina, which is understanding, is about comprehension. It's about both extrapolation in making things wider and sort of growing them into bigger ideas, but also getting into the specificities of it. It's connected with words like binyan, which means building, but it's also connected with hitbonenut, which is the word for meditation, which means to concentrate and to extrapolate and to comprehend. And then chachma, which is wisdom, is really about insight. So when we talk about a Chabad meditative approach, it exists in two facets. We talk about it as wisdom, understanding, knowledge, meaning insight, comprehension, and connection. So we have an insight into something. That insight is fleeting and is oftentimes very abstract. So then the second part of the experience is to then connect with it in a way before connecting, trying to break it down into bite-sized pieces and comprehend it and extrapolate it, and then find something to connect to, right? That infuses our experience. And by the same token, it also exists oftentimes in the other mode, which is, if that were to be, so to speak, top down, the other would be bottom up. So Das, which is connection and knowledge, we would say is focus at that point. So it's creating a space and focusing your mind on whatever it is you're going to think about. And then so you take an idea. The common ideas that are discussed by the mystics is something like, there's a pasuk that says, Va'atam chaya, that you give vitality to everything. That God's essence really, right? When we say Ata, which means you, we're talking about something that's more essential than a name, right? Often we have a lot of names for God, and names always connote a certain type of relationship, right? You, when you're called by your parents, is you're called a different name than by your children or by your congregants or by anybody, right? So names have a certain connotation to them, but you is just you, right? It's essential. And that's why when somebody says, hey, you, it can often be kind of jarring, right? Because it's really like grabbing at who you are. So when we say Ba'atam chayas kulam, that you, God's essence is the source of all vitality, and you are constantly giving vitality. So let's say, so what you do is, you first is the Das experience, is to focus. So I'm going to focus on this idea. So I start to come up with my mind, how do I see that? How do I experience that? Right? In the verse from Job, it says that from my flesh I see godliness. Right? That the way we can first relate to God is just our physical experience in this world. So I think about the earth and how it has a latent power to grow things and to give life, right? If you put a seed in a piece of wood, it won't grow the same way it will grow in a piece of dirt. There's something in the dirt that grows. Then I think about minerals, stones, and their vitality, right? We see how they're evolving in certain ways in it's been a long time since I took geology, right. But etc. And then we think about
Yeah, go on. Sorry.
Okay, then we think about plant life and how plant life grows and evolves and develops, and we think about animal life, and we continue to broaden our mind in just what's in this physical world. And then we extrapolate further and we start to think about spiritual realms. So we think about, energies like constellations, or even some idea of astrology, which is sort of within Judaism. We think about what angels, when Judaism talks about angels, what angels represent, which is transference of energies in directed ways. And we start to go beyond and beyond into more ethereal, abstract realms. And the idea is, as we grow that and we develop that and we focus our mind on that more, we're working towards an insight. And that insight is not something that you can come up with by yourself. It's something that through that process you develop. Right? So first we talked about the top down, from insight to focus. Second way is from focus to insight, and they serve each other. So I come up with a new insight, and that insight then it reinfuses my next experience. And the insight idea is like the story of Archimedes. There's a sort of apocryphal story of Archimedes that he was challenged or tasked with measuring the weight of the king's chair, and he couldn't figure out how to do it. And he spent months or weeks or whatever it was thinking about all the different ways he could build a scale that was big enough or do something that would measure it. And then he sort of put it to the side, and he was taking a bath, and he realized he had this eureka moment, right? That's where the expression eureka comes from, that he realized that his weight in a bath, his weight displaces a certain amount of water relative to his weight. So if they put it, so the story goes that he was running through the streets of Syracuse naked, screaming, "Eureka, Eureka," right? That's the insight that we're trying to go for, because the insight infuses emotions, right? So that insight, he was losing himself, but he was feeling. So that's in sort of a nutshell, the idea of meditation.
So do you like, practically speaking, like, right? So like also to try and give people sort of like things like, right? Can you walk us through like something like that? So like in terms of meditation,
For sure.
Right? So I think that'll be cool.
For sure. So the primary experience of Jewish prayer is the Shema, right? The Shema, which declares God's unity and God's oneness, is the highlight of every prayer service within Judaism. And each prayer service has a build up to the Shema, right? So in the morning, we start with verses of praise. We start talking about the godliness within the world, and then we build up to the Shema. But at nighttime, we have Mariv, which is a different experience. So first what we start to think about is how the day is gone and how the day has passed, right? And that in the vacuum of, or excuse me, in the absence of light exists darkness.
Okay. Should we do this? Should we take people through?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
we start with darkness comes as light leaves, right? So we try to picture in our mind the sun setting and the darkness sort of coming over the earth, right, and taking it over and swallowing it.
Right. So people should just sit in a comfortable chair, right? So right, they can close their eyes, they can listen to the word, right? So the first image is, right, the night coming, right? And so when we think about the darkness coming, we think about how creation is expressed through communication, right? Our tradition is that when God created the world, he did it through communication, through speech, right? So darkness is part of that creation. And even though it might indicate a lack of light, a lack of vitality, it's also part of what's being created and part of this creation process. So even though we're transforming into, right, we've come home, we're now settled, we're transforming into we're pivoting from a different experience, which is our daytime experience, where we're out in the world and affecting the world around us. Now we're going inward, and while it might first present itself as a darkness, there's creative energies there too, which express themselves through communication. And we start to meditate on
how darkness is not, while it is the absence of light, is latent or is pregnant with the capacity to be illuminated. Right? It's not just, we don't look at darkness as its own entity, but as in being the lack of light is that it's waiting for light. And we think about how what we can do in this world is illuminate. Like we said before, that the soul is a candle and its job is to illuminate. And so we start to think about, what is my true essence? What is my true self? And that essence, that self, is my soul. Right? We know that the soul is referred to by a bunch of different terms, and that Yisrael, or Israel, is one of the expressions that highlights the soul's alignment and its elevations. Right? Yisrael has a bunch of different meanings to it. One being struggling with God, one being yashar, straight with God, but also it's the same letters as li rosh, which means for me ahead. Right? That the soul, the Jewish soul, expresses God's ultimate elevation, right? His highest, and that's us. That's our native essence. So we start to prepare ourselves for the Shema, thinking that while I've come to this place that as the day has ended and a new day begins, while it presents itself first as a darkness, it's telling me that there's room for me to illuminate it. And so we start to focus our mind and we come to Shema. So the first thing we do is we cover our eyes. And we cover our eyes that we're actively rejecting the physical world we see around us. Right? We spent a whole day in this world engaging with physicality, and we experienced it as a existence into itself or unto itself. And when we come to the Shema, when we come to connect to our essence, we say, the world as I perceive it around me does not exist. The fragmentation of this world is not a real existence. And so we say Shema, which means to hear and to understand, but it also means to gather. And it means to gather my disparate experience of this day, of this life, right? That I feel sometimes split and torn apart and spread out thin, and I don't always connect to my essence, which is my Yisrael, which is my vitality, and much broader than that and much greater than that is my essential uniqueness in how I am a manifestation of God within this physical world. So we say Shema, and then we say Yisrael, and then we say Adonai. And when we say Adonai, what we're having in mind is that is godliness the way it's ultimately transcendent and beyond any type of limitations. And we say Adonai Eloheinu, which means that God, the ultimate transcendent essence of existence, is our personal God, is a God that we have a relationship to. And that is Adonai Echad, that we all exist in that oneness, that I exist in that oneness, and my experience, as much as it might have been disparate and fragmented till now, throughout the day, is now unified. So we'll try to say it all together. I can't hear anybody, but we'll say it all together, and we try to push away the feelings of even feeling the world around us, and reminding ourselves that we exist on a plane that is totally beyond this physical experience. And the idea is to spend a moment in this expanded consciousness, and we can take that insight and that experience into our physical being afterwards. So we say, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. And we uncover our eyes. And we take a moment to look at the world around us. And we try to use that insight that we had, that we experienced in that brief moment, to realign how we see the world. And to make it not as a world of fragmentation, but to see the harmony within the multiplicity. And that's expressed by the next verse that we say, Baruch Shem, blessed blessed is a word that is often misconstrued, and blessings really refer to activation. It means to experience, right? Blessing means to draw down. There's the word for knees in Hebrew is birkayim, right? The knees bring you down. And also the word brecha, which is a pool, right, is a collection of water. And we know water always goes down. So we say Baruch Shem, and we say it in a way that the name of the dignity of godliness, which is dignity always connotes interacting with another individual. So the dignity of the name, the glory of the name exists forever, right? That within, and what we're trying to have in mind at that point is that within the limitations of physicality, or the fragmentation that we have sort of shut ourselves off from for a moment, we're now sort of giving ourselves an opportunity to reborn, to experience a rebirth, and to reframe our mind and our mind's eye to see it as something that is expressing harmony instead of fragmentation.
So I oh my God, I love all that for so many different reasons. First and foremost, right? So Moshe, right? So says, right? Are we saying the Orthodox people's meditation is tefillah? That's what I always thought about it, kind of confirming. I think what we're saying is that tefillah is meditation for Orthodox and non-Orthodox alike, not just for Orthodox people.
Right.
But more than that, I mean, to start from the end, one of the things that, as I just realized as we were doing this, and perhaps it was because of the time, the amount of time that my hand was on my eyes, right, is that it allowing ourselves to close down and reopen intentionally forces us to reevaluate the moment we're in, right? Not in the unity, the moment you're in, right? So that right, that the beauty of that is that it's a little bit what, let's say in other kinds of meditation, we would say those are like micro hits, right? Those are like micro mindfulness moments, right? You don't need a whole setup, right? You don't need the whole thing, right? But 3 times a day, or even once a day, or just right. So one of the things I like a lot, right? My favorite Shema is the bedtime Shema, right? So if you will, the 4th Shema in the in the day, and we have a whole journaling sheet on the Tshuva Center sort of like around it. But that moment you don't need a whole setup. You can just be in your bed, do that for the 30 seconds it takes, or the minute and a half it takes, and then reevaluate. And in that sense, right, it is a deeply mystical thing that the Zohar, right, the book of Zohar talks a lot about. The blessing is forcing down a spirit into us, right, a goodness into the world, right. And I like that, right? So when we do a blessing, we are creating more goodness. We're forcing God for more goodness, basically. Right. And God doesn't mind that. That's what it's there for, right?
That's the whole point of it, right?
Right.
So the bedtime Shema in particular is very powerful because the whole focus of that is to say, I had a lot of experiences today, right? And the mystical practice within the bedtime Shema is all about making what's called a cheshbon nefesh, or an accounting of the soul, right? To go through every moment of your day and try to see what were the moments where I experienced connectedness and what were the moments that I experienced disconnectedness, right? And to swallow them all up in that Shema, in that moment where your essence is connected, where you're trying to connect your essence, right? To experience that elevated consciousness, that the good, and I'm schlepping the good and the bad along with me, right? My moments of connectedness and my moments of disconnectedness, they were all me. Right. And they're all an opportunity to grow.
Right. We talk about it as in a both and. Yeah. And I think that's very, very important because, right, the moments of disconnectedness allow us to then reconnect, and the moments of connectedness allows us to then see when we feel disconnected, right? So like they have to feed each other.
Right. And the way the mystics teach it is that when we talk about doing mitzvahs or doing good deeds in bettering the world, there are moments that, like when we say the Shema, there are other moments throughout our day in being involved in godliness that we can experience that elevated consciousness, even for a micro minute, right? Or a micro moment. And the idea is that ultimately what we're working towards is to just elongate those experiences and to make them more often throughout our day.
Absolutely. So there's a couple of things, right? So now that we've done the meditation, right? So one of the first original questions is, how do you think Buddhist meditation is different from like Chabad meditation?
So I have very little understanding on other forms of meditation, but from what I can ascertain, and please correct me if I'm wrong,
Right.
Buddhist meditation is ultimately a focus inward that the paradigm is, or sort of the launching pad is my own existence. And it's about connecting to a more still or quiet or essential part of myself within myself, and quieting the distractions within myself around me.
Yes, I would add that by doing so, that then I connect to the largeness of the universe. That sort of, that when I go inwards, right, the micro and the macro are aligned, and therefore I'm able to sort of not annihilate myself, but then connect to the fact that I'm part of a much, 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 much larger, we'll call it organism or existence or whatever, right?
Right.
You know, it's funny because for me, right, and maybe I'm answering the question for it, but for me, right, the name of God, right, when you said I write Adonai, right, which I always think is a very clever way for whatever that thing is that we already subjugated ourselves, that even when we see his name, we say master. Right, sort of, right, sort of like, right, that he's very clever and like making right, that right in the subconscious is like, you're not going to say my name, you're going to say master.
Right.
But we'll put that aside for a second.
Sure.
That when we say the name for God Adonai, right, the actual words, the Yud He Vav He, right, the unpronounceable, right, Shem Meforash, right, tetragrammaton, whatever you call it. In the Zohar, I see it many times as Havaya, which means existence, which means all of creation, right? The being of being, right? Not the being itself, but like just being, all that is the Havaya, right? The experience of life. So in that sense, I see them closer than most people, but I think in that sense, Buddhism connects things, right? So what I hear, or it seems what I'm saying for you, that sort of the within the Chabad meditation, or within that scope of thing, it is more of leaning into the body than it is to annihilate the self into connection to the universe, but rather really expanding the self into the universe. Is that right?
Right. I would say, and again, like I have a limited understanding, but I would say.
So just because she's much more expert in this. My experience of Buddhism, she says, is that it's comprised of attention techniques that allow one to be present with sense of experience that are arising in the present moment. Silence and stillness are byproducts of that attention practice. The impact of paying attention to sensation in the present moment, and this dissecting them or holding them all simultaneously is giving access to the source, or God, a 0 point where all arisings come from and passings go to.
Right. So what to me, what seems to be the difference is there's two facets within Jewish meditation. There's what we experience in the Shema, and there is the sort of preparatory meditation that we were talking about in the top down and bottom up focus and insight, right? Because that, as a way to prepare for the time of prayer, is what brings us to a place where we can ultimately cultivate that elevated consciousness. And I think that the ultimate focus of Jewish meditation is to not focus on myself. Because any experience of myself is my animal soul trying to feel its own sense. And like we would say, like you say, ego is edging God out, or like in the Chuck C diagram, seeing the universe as a circle that stops right here. And that our focus is certainly in the intellectual component of Jewish meditation, which is upon which a tremendous premium is placed. The intellectual pursuit is to broaden our mind and make godliness more real for us. And that should infuse the body's experience to be schlepped along, to be carried along, and to be interested and almost even coerced into being involved with Jewish experience, with godly experience. And that the more we can, the focus of making of further understanding and gaining new insight into spirituality and into godliness and into essence of that Havaya existence type of deal, the more it becomes real for us, and the more we ultimately feel something, right? We feel excitement, and we feel responsibility, and we feel love and awe of our Creator and of the essence that unites us all. And those feelings are what push us and develop us and help us to align our body and to have a, so to speak, proper relationship with our body and with our physicality, to not let it run the show, but to make it involved and feel present to, and feel like it's participating in the godly Jewish experience.
Interesting. So just as do you focus on the prayer and the words of petition, and does that lead to a mind state or an experience of higher consciousness?
Could you repeat that question?
Do you focus on the prayer and words of petition, and does that lead to a mind state or an experience of higher consciousness? Like, do you focus on the word, the repetition where it's part of?
Right. So, yeah. So speech in general, the reason why Jewish prayer is, I see the comment of mantra.
By the way, mantra, right? Yeah.
Right. So I'm not sure it's entirely the same idea. The reason why prayer in Judaism is spoken and not, thought about or sort of like felt, right? We don't just read the prayers, but we actually say them out loud, is because, like we said before, speech is creative. It has a creative capacity to it. God created the world with speech, the tradition tells us, and that when we speak, we're mimicking that creative capacity, and we are affecting the world around us, right? Speech has this. Speech is in the mystic tradition is one of the most focused on ideas, really.
Right.
It's the mystics are craving to understand speech because it's the ultimate interface. Right, we have our intellect and our emotions, which are purely for us. We have our thoughts, which are already relating to somebody else, but it's still inside of us. And speech is where we can interface, where we can express thoughts. But something that seems so clear to us in our thought, all of a sudden becomes very difficult to explain to somebody else, right?
Right.
I have to constrict my thoughts in a tremendous way in order to share them with you, that you can then interact with them.
Right.
So speech is the ultimate playing ground for the ultimate arena for creation, for involving something outside of you.
Right. And it pulls out some energy from us.
Right.
For sure. All right. We have like 4 minutes, but there's like 3 more questions which I want to get to. One, are there any female leaders in the Khabad currently, in the Khabad community?
So I would say that there are no leaders technically, right? Our leader is the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and his wife was a powerhouse of leadership as well in her own way. Now you see the Rebbe's whole goal of charging the world with spreading goodness and kindness was to empower everybody to go out to their environment and to their neighborhood and their friends and their surroundings, and to share goodness with them. And so you have what are called the Rebbe's emissaries, who go and open Chabad houses in all over the world. Right, there's 6,000 of them currently, and each one is a rabbi and a rebbitzin, a male rabbi and a female rabbi, so to speak. And they work in tandem, and they work equally, and they each bring their own dynamics to the community that they're building and engaging with. So there is in a lot of ways
mostly within the family setting, not so much in the sort of like leadership setting, right?
I mean, it's so there is no centralized leadership at this point, right, other than the Rebbe. So right. So each Chabad house exists in its own dynamic, and the female leadership is oftentimes, more involved and more focused than the male leadership, I would say.
Right. Do you have an introductory book recommendation of Chabad Jewish mysticism?
There is a book called The Knowledge of God. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, hold on one second. The Knowledge of God, which is by I don't know if you can see that. It's by a rabbi called Markel, Markel. If you search Knowledge of God Markel, you should be able to find it. It is it's really brilliant. It's based off of the second Chabad rabbi, the second leader of the Chabad movement, whose name was Dovber. He wrote probably the most extensively out of any of the rabbis. And he spent a tremendous amount of time discussing and really breaking down and systematizing meditation within Judaism. And one of his main texts is called Sharei Ora, which means the gates of light. And that's where his methodology is really found. And that's a sort of translation and synopsis of it that is, pretty friendly to entry-level understandings of Jewish mysticism.
Fantastic. Okay, one last comment. What do you think of Albert Einstein's interpretation? A human being is part of the whole, called the universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thought and feelings, as something separate from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. The striving to free oneself from this delusion is the one issue of true religion. Not to nourish the delusion, but to try to overcome it is the way to reach the attainable measure of peace of mind.
I think I would say that Judaism is not working to attain peace of mind.
Fair enough.
I think we really, right, we talked about one of the meanings of Yisrael, and really the essential meaning is to struggle with God. And we're not looking to be complacent with our world around us. We're constantly struggling with the world around us, and specifically before we're in a messianic state, with all the horrible, terrible things that exist in this world, and our obligation to make this world a better, brighter place. So, yes. I would imagine that if you're a genius of Einstein's caliber, then all you're looking for is peace of mind, because the genius experience is fraught with difficulty. But that's not what Judaism. In my own humble opinion, I don't think that's what Judaism is about.
It's funny. I agree with that. And I think that's a good place that we're ending right now, which is right that sort of we're not seeking to be complacent. We're seeking to struggle with more intentionality, right? We're seeking to constantly be in that pull push of body, soul, of good, bad, of light, darkness, right? What we call the integrated self, the both and.
Yes.
And I think that for me, I I say this often, there is no growth, there is no movement, there is no balance in life without moving forward. That's why halakha is called halakha. It's walking.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
walking is nothing if not a controlled falling. You take one step, right? Especially if you see a child to like start to walk, like you take one step, you balance, like, and that sort of like constant sort of like, you know, I got it, oh, I'm falling, I got it, I'm falling.
Yeah.
You know, I think is the way that we pave the path towards.
Fantastic.
This has been unbelievably interesting. I think I could talk for hours. I think people could ask 1,000 more questions, but this is really, really amazing.
This has been fantastic.
For sure. We should probably do more stuff like this.
I would love to.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for spending time with us. What's going on for you? If people want to find you, or you know.
So I started a project over Corona called Modal Meditations.
Modal?
Modal. MODAL.
Okay.
You can find it on Instagram. It's been a fun little project where I take different Hasidic ideas that I've learned and try to encapsulate them in a nice little Instagram post of something that's thought-provoking, and sort of fodder to engage with as a meditation. Modal as an acronym for one of the books of the Mizritcher Maggid, who I found this quote at the beginning of Corona that just blew me away, that they were asking Jung about, it was towards, Jung was like in his 80s, and they were asking him about how he developed his methodologies, and he goes through a whole thing, and then he says, and you should know, by the way, that there was a rabbi in Mizrich 200 years ago who came up with everything that I did.
Wow.
And I saw that, and I was just like, this is unreal. So I started going through the Maggid stuff, and his main book is called Maggid Dvar Yaakov. So the acronym Modal comes from that, and so I try to take things I've learned from him and from his works and try to make them engageable, I suppose.
Fantastic. We should probably, we'll put it on the website and resources. So yeah, that's been really, really, what is the so it's MOD.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Somebody got it.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
That's it.
Modal Meditations. Perfect.
Very cool.
Excellent. Thank you so much. People can find us there.
Thank you.
For us, our groups, our Tshuva group is running as usual. Also Artists in Recovery. And of course, on the 22nd, we're going to have a pop-up Shabbat because it's also inauguration week. We're dedicated to freedom and new freedom. So that's on the 22nd. It's on the website. You can register. Also on the 28th, we're going to do a Tu B'Shvat, and we're going to do a bibliomancy, the new word that's that Drew just told me today. We're going to do a Torah Tarot. So if you've been with us on Rosh Hashanah and did Torah Tarot, we're doing that again on the 28th with Rabbi Mike Borovitz. To say that I am proud of you and to say how much I love you truly from my heart is really an understatement. It's been really, 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 really phenomenal spending more time with you. And this has really been kind of amazing. So thank you everybody for joining in. You and I will talk. Everybody, thank you. Shabbat Shalom. We'll talk soon.
Shalom.
Thank you.